Hi everyone, it's Eliana and I have a bunch of cards to share with you today. I have been on a mission to use up all of my 6x6 paper pads so that next year I could get all new Christmas paper. I pulled out all of the decorative papers that I thought I could use for this project, and I'm just going to trim down each panel to A2 size. That's 4¼ by 5½. And once I get those all trimmed out, then I could get started. I'm also going to be cutting down some vellum into some strips. These strips are about 1.5 inches wide and they just need to be long enough to wrap around the card front. Once I have that all done, I'm just going to position the vellum in front of my card, and then I'm just going to crease the paper or crease the vellum. And then to adhere it, I'm just going to be using some washi tape to hold the vellum down. You could use tape if you want, but I'm just trying to use up the supplies that I have. Now for the stamping, I have cut down some black cardstock. This is Gina Onyx black cardstock, and I'm just going to use my anti-static pouch, and this will just prevent any of the embossing powder from sticking where I don't want it to be. I am using the Altenew Peace on Earth stamp set, and I'm going to use the ornament die the ornament stamp that's in the set. I'm just going to place my cardstock in the corner, and I'm going to use some embossing ink. I'm going to be using the Ink on 3 embossing ink, and the first stamp is usually the one that primes your stamp, so I usually end up stamping that a couple of times just to be able to get a good coverage. Then I'll rotate my cardstock, and that way I could save some steps when I go to emboss or add my embossing powder. So I'm going to keep rotating that paper. I do a few at a time, and right away I like to put my embossing powder on my cardstock just because I don't want it to lose that stick. I'm using Ranger Princess Gold, and the only reason why I chose this one is because it was my gold embossing powder that was already in a tub, and since I was making a lot of these, I just used what was already in a convenient container. I've heat up my heat gun. Heat up my heat gun, and I am just going to melt that embossing powder. Once that is done, I'm going to be using this embossing pen. I believe this is a Ranger pen, and I'm going to be coloring in the topper to the ornament. It just looked a little odd being kind of see-through, so I thought it would just make more sense to color it in. And it did not take long to color these in and then add some more embossing powder to it. It'll also give you a chance to add some more powder to anywhere that you may have missed. Once this is done, I'm going to melt that again and proceed to the next step. Now, in making all of these cards, I did find a nice little trick about die cutting that it really did make this process go a little bit faster. So I cut down each one of those pieces of cardstock, and I made sure that I kept the corner that was in the corner of the Misti. That way I could line everything up with that original corner and then just run it through my little die cutter. Now, the reason why I do that is because the Misti stamped the image in the exact same spot. So the image is the same distance from that corner. So if you do a template and then you just line up the cardstock with that template, then you could whiz through all of the die cutting without having to visually line things up each time. So it made the die cutting go so much faster. I hope that really did make sense. Now to cut out the letters J and Y, I am using the Altenew Classic Alphabet die set, and I did take a full-size sheet of the Onyx black cardstock and I added some adhesive to the back, and I used Stick It, and I also used a Thermoweb double-sided tape. And the reason why I did that is because I am going to be using foam to mount my letters onto that. So I've taken a piece of fun foam, the sticky back fun foam, and I've also cut out the letters. And what I did was I just stacked those together. So instead of stacking multiple layers of the alphabet, I just have a layer of foam and a layer of the cardstock, and it made it go by so much faster. Now I'm taking some of the leftover foam that I have in my stash that I've used to die cut with, and I've just used little scraps to pop up the ornament. And I only need to add foam to the center part because I'm going to be tucking the other letters around that. So once I get that adhesive backing off, I'm going to center it onto my strip. And once I get that centered, now I'm able to remove the backing off the letters and just tuck them in underneath that ornament, and that will support the edges of the ornament. And I wanted to add some thread to the top of the ornament, and so I'm just using some gold thread from my stash, and I'm just going to trim it down. I just threaded it through and I'm going to trim it down, and then I'm going to use a small piece of washi to adhere it to the back. Now in the end, I'm going to show you a variation of this card, and you won't be able to tuck it in on that card, but what I did use is that I used a decorative piece of washi that was Christmassy just to hold the ornament in place on that final card, and you'll understand when I get to that part. Now for the sentiment, I just used a Gina K Sentimental Holiday, and I just stamped everything all at once. It went by super fast with Misti, and I'm going to just show it to you a couple of times because I'm pretty sure you don't want to see all of that. Now I'm going to use up all of those strips that I had trimmed down from the card fronts. I have my trimmer here, and it's really hard to line things up on a small piece of paper, so I'm using my creative corner to butt up against the edge of the trimmer and the edge of the paper. And so I have these tiny little strips, and each one's going to be a little bit different, I suppose, because these are all scraps. And I'm using that creative corner as a place to, as a guide to trim these into straight strips. Once I get all these strips done, I'm going to just try to coordinate them just so that I could mix and match them. I've added adhesive to the edges of my cardstock, and now I'm going to use the corners of the Misti to help line up my cardstock. I'm checking the patterns to make sure that they match, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line them up on the bottom. Once I get the bottom done, I'm just going to press it down. Then I'm going to move the cardstock to the top, and then I'm going to press that down. And then I created a little bit of a template, so I know to move my cardstock to this piece of washi tape. And I'm going to use my creative corner, and I know the edge of the creative corner goes against the side of the Misti with that piece of washi tape. And that will allow me to stick that center piece completely straight. And when you're making a bunch of these cards, it makes it go by super, super fast. Then I'm going to take my trimmer, and I'm just going to trim those overhanging pieces. So I'm just going to flip it around so that I could see where the edge of the cardstock is, and then I can just trim it. Once again, doing these in batches just really, really helped get everything done. Okay, so in the end, I used up pretty much all of my cardstock, and I made 158 cards. So here are all of the different cards that I made, and they all look a little bit different. but I think they turned out really great. I think my favorite ones were the green ones with the stripes and the green ones with the mint and weather cardstock. And I'm going to show you what I have left over. I just have these tiny little strips left over, and a few other remnants. I did keep a couple of the bigger pieces just because I thought they would be handy. Um, so I used up all of these packs, and there are some scraps from other projects left behind. And I didn't have enough to create a full card because I didn't have enough matching strips. And here are the two that I kept that were the snow background, and I just couldn't part with those. And those would be easy to use on any winter card. So thank you for sticking with me with all of these projects using up my pattern paper. And I'm pretty sure I'm still going to use what's left in this bin. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And I hope you guys have a very Merry Christmas. Bye.